Good morning.
Good morning.
Janice Canterbury. Dr. Rohit Kanai. Chair, co-leader of the WP.
Thank you very much, Brother Kadaki. Good morning to the media and to the viewing and listening public. Since President Ali's announcement of its government's intention to give a one-off cash transfer to Guyanese, there has been a flurry of discussion in the public media and within the wider society. WPA is not surprised at this development. We recall a similar mass interest when Professor Clive Thomas first put the idea on the agenda at the annual AUC Guyana Emancipation Symposium held in Buxton in August of 2018. We recall that many of the major political players were either lukewarm or dismissive of the proposal, but it was clear that it had captured the imagination of the masses, especially the working people and the poor. Despite the skepticism from the political elites, the WPA has kept the idea in the public arena. We remain convinced that a universal basic income in the form of cash transfers is one of the most effective means of reducing poverty in Guyana. Our oil and gas windfall affords us a golden opportunity to implement this idea, which has been successfully adopted in many countries across the world. Indeed, the United Nations has adopted it as part of its sustainable development goals. For the WPA, this matter of the cash transfer is rooted in our commitment to alleviate poverty as a developmental goal. It goes beyond politicking. WPA is therefore heartened that some of the initial skeptics have warmed to the idea as a serious policy initiative. In this regard, the PPP's attempt to utilize it as a political gimmick should not diminish its seriousness. While WPA does not claim ownership of the idea, we are proud to have been the first Guyanese political party to place it on the national development agenda. What is now patently clear is that it is the only area of the oil and gas discourse that the broad masses of Guyanese feel connected to. Attempts by Vice President Jack Dio to claim ownership of the idea should be treated as a form of desperation by a government which has failed to generate any serious policies since taking office in 2020. Further, the president's swift reversal of the initial announcement points to a lack of thought and foresight on the government's part. Had the government heeded the WPA's call for a feasibility study before implementation, it would not have found itself in such an embarrassing situation. Since its initial rollout in 2018, WPA has been updating what we now call the Buxton Proposal. We are thankful to Professor Clive Thomas and the WPA's Policy Committee for the work they have put in this regard. Given the renewed interest, we feel the time has come to again engage the public on the matter, hence this press conference. We hope in the process to give the WPA's take on some of the questions which have been animating the public discourse since the president's initial announcement. End of statement.
Yes, I'm willing to engage in response to any questions that are raised. But I think it's important, following from the statement that was just read, to make a couple of observations. One of them is that the Buxton Proposal is rooted in the family, is rooted in the household, it is rooted in social agents, it's rooted, therefore, in the society of Guyana. And this, as Dr. Hines has pointed out in the statement, remains one of the few instances where people feel connected themselves directly to the possibilities or the findings or discoveries in oil and gas. To my mind, it's shameful that the government can go to the extent of saying that they would give this to households and then turn around and change their mind and decide to give it to every eligible voter. Because what else is an adult over 18 but an eligible voter? And this, to my mind, is a scandal of very high proportions. People do not decide on what households are in any country, including Guyana, which I might say, because I'm familiar with the processes in Guyana, do not arrive at a notion of a family or a household willy-nilly. They don't sit in an office and do that. They do experiments, social experiments, as we have done in Guyana for many years, decades, to arrive at what considerations respond statistically to opportunities for being able to capture the nature of a household. And two sayings come to mind, two figures of speech. One is that they share a common pot and they share a common roof. That is not a deduction of somebody's intellect. It's an observation that has been made in practice. And I think that is a disrespect to all those researchers, agencies around the world, World Bank, IMF, United Nations, Inter-American Development Bank, all these agencies that have UNICEF that have poured eons of money in trying to develop concepts to support empirical research in Guyana. And they have established that the two single most correlating indicators to what is a household is in fact a common pot and a common roof. A common pot is not just a place where you put food in. It's making a decision about what you're going to put in the pot, making decisions about how you're going to finance it, making decisions about who's going to buy and create the opportunities for having a pot, getting the food, going to the market. It's also made with the consideration of what different people in the household need within a pot. Because children don't have the same nutrition needs as adults. All these things go to make a part, and therefore a collective social decisions. And that's the foundation of a household. We have a social unit. This is something that we can't just substitute with calling for anybody who's eligible to vote, because that is what it boils down to. That is what defines a person who has an ID card and who is over 18. Crude, nasty, and awful. And we should not turn ourselves into that type of person. Similarly, a common roof is not even a house where you might not have a roof. Some people sleep on the tarpaulins. Some people sleep in tents. Some people sleep on the bottom house. And that's under people's floors. You don't have to have a common roof that is a traditional roof. It's a place that they join in common abode. And this can be established and has been established empirically. It's an insult to the Bureau of Statistics that we should deny them the opportunity of an inventive contribution they made to social studies around the world by ignoring it. And it shows the ignorance of the people who make these decisions. They're utter callousness and disregard for what is important in developing us and making us better human beings. I therefore want to make that observation here, because I know people jumping around saying, it's better to give the 2 people that I could get back 200,000. But what about the family that has 4 children? How do you accommodate their needs? They may even be teenage mothers who have not yet reached the age of 18. All these considerations come to play. And I believe that we should proceed with science-based analysis. And we should therefore rely on the Bureau of Statistics. And I'm very disappointed that that is not the case. I think the other important point that is to be made, that this is a handout. And it is called a handout because it's given under a program that is not worked out in terms of time. There's no guarantee it will be repeated. There's no stated regularity in it. So people can't even use it as a potential borrowing money. It's not a financial asset they're accumulating. They're getting a once for all a handout. They don't know when it's coming next. This is not a time-bound, serious social executed project. This is a gamble to get what the definition of the recipients of the money are defined as people who vote. And the vote gathering machine, I think that's the shameful part of it. And I therefore take great offense and think the party should take great offense that we should degenerate every single idea in our country to somebody's hustle. Those are the 2 additional points I want to make, but I'm open to any discussion based on what we have sent out to people. We sent an entire copy of the revised version of the last revised version in print of the Boxer proposal. This was in 2022, last couple of years ago. And therefore I'm willing to respond to any questions you might raise.
Professor Thomas Dennis World and Moravian. Professor,
Yeah.
using the household formula, what safeguards can be put in place to avoid people trying to trick the system, excuse me, by splitting their existing households into more than one so that they can actually benefit more from their cash grants?
Those are risks we all run in every survey. People can deliberately do that, of course, but they will fail more often than not. Because in the same way that we're able to regulate the restrictions around a household through the use of this statistical technique, we'll also apply it to this payment of the cash universal basic income to them. So it's not something that is not new, and we'll cater for it. We decide to balance the cost of regulation against how much we're likely to capture by preventing corruption. We'll do all those things. That's why we want a feasibility study. We want a pilot study. That's what's called for if you read the document. We clearly call for feasibility and a pilot study. So all these things will be subject to scientific, social, at least social scientific methodologies, and we won't be following everybody's whim and fancy. I'm seriously disappointed that so long we've had it in Guyana. 2018, even before it has resumed its recent popularity, largely because the Nobel Prize for Economics has been given to one of the pioneers of this study. That now we come to recognize its importance. We could have been leaders in this. This is not something new. This is what, 8 years. It was formulated before we even had forced oil. It's not something randomly occurring. The first reports of the finding of oil.
Right, I understand. Do you have any preliminary ideas of what? Do you have any preliminary ideas about what can some of these safeguards be?
Yes, we can. We will police them. First of all, everybody who becomes a recipient of the Buxton Portal Universal Basic Income becomes registered for paying taxes. So we have that safeguard and that running agency covering the distribution and the payment of income to anybody in the country. So now under this thing that they have here, there's no guarantee that a person would pay income and the grant that they get them. But we think that it's very good for paying income. But we see under the Buxton proposal, everybody that receives a universal basic income has to add it to the tax declarations. And they receive it by monetary instrument, not cash in their hand, so that there will be a receipt for its receipt. For the person receiving it, they'll have to get a receipt. And that will be a documentary record of it being sent out. Thirdly, it will be subject to digital control because we will ensure that everybody that is eligible for it and receive it will have to have a digital number within Guyana and a clear identification based on that of the person's financial and other productive assets. So that can also be monitored electronically. And those are controls that we have.
But does that avoid the splitting of households?
What's that?
But do your ideas that you've just put forward there, do they avoid the splitting of households conveniently?
If there's what?
Will it avoid the splitting of households conveniently?
We can't control the propensity of people to be corrupt. We can't even control this government's propensity to be corrupt. We can't control any government. So there will always be opportunities of people who want to run and ride the system and to play games with it. So we have to set up a mechanism that can control that. And I think it's easier to do that once it's a regular time honored fixed payment, regular payment, everybody knows what they're entitled to. Than if it were left in this haphazard way where we don't even know that the people distributing it has not collected more money and not distributing less money than what they collected. We don't even know that because we'll have to rely on the same people, same sources for records. We don't separate the government, the payer, from the payee. So we collect the independent recording of what is happening. And we therefore have a self-built-in check to the system. There's no such check. How you can tell when somebody has not received the claim to be 18 and will not receive the thing? They can complain. That's all they can do. But you can't run no digital check against it. because it's not registered income paid to them. It passes through no banking system. People come to your house, a man come to the gun, and 2 or 3 other women come in from the office, and they hand you an envelope that you're supposed to check, or a check that you're supposed to monitor at the same time. That is open to corruption. And of course, every idea will make an effort to knock down, and I support that, because that's the way in which you find errors that might exist in your proposals, and that is understandable. But there are no perfect solutions in social life, but there are solutions that are workable in the sense that over the long run, they justify their existence. Because over the long run, you're able to minimize the corrupt and interventionist stealing and thieving and that type of thing that seems to sort of dog the existence of any program based on the transfer of money.
Professor, in terms of using the cash transfer as a form of proof of income for any loans from the banks, to what extent is this risky? Because basically, if there is a change in government at any time, a government can decide that it will cancel the idea of giving a cash grant or reducing the amount or anything like that. So, how does one guard against uncertainty as far as using a cash grant as a means of income to show to the bank?
There's no different uncertainty when you depend on a private employer to pay you. Many of them escape out the country. They dodge, they rob many, many employees in the country. Why should the government be more thieving than them? You're making an a priori statement that I don't think can be justified. Why should a coming in government, if a social program is working, want to abandon it? That's the whole point of trying to make it a workable program. So it becomes part of the cultural and economic and social legacy of the country. It becomes part of our contributions to humankind. That is what we want to be doing. We want to be advancing. We find all this oil, so at least let us give back something to us. Let's give back the working people an opportunity that they should not forever be known as the working poor. And one way in which we can guarantee that is to use a proportion of the income received from the windfall profits of oil to eliminate monetary poverty within Guyana. We can make that a signal achievement, because otherwise we lose to not capturing enough revenue. All sorts of things are happening as we're going on. So we're trying our very best to ensure that some minimum achievement is done and made on behalf of Guyana's interests. That is what we want to do. And that is what I think we should be encouraging our people to do. That we think is a task for us who are not oil workers. Yes, it must be legislated. That's why I started off by saying it must be time-based, time control. Periodicity should be defined in law, whether it's once a year, once a quarter, whatever it is. So you can convert it into a financial asset that you yourself can use as the receiver of these monies, potentially going forward in the future, as a sign of your ownership of wealth. That you get into the financial system, you're able to borrow, you're able to do things against that. People come into the market and sell securities to discount the future money that you might be able to get. This becomes a trading instrument. I might come to you and say, look, Kidaki, instead of waiting until next 10 years to get 50,000 US, I'll give you 50,000 US now and deduct an interest payment for it. So you get net, let's say, of 40,000. And you might say, yes, I agree, I take it now because I want to do things urgently. I make money, you make money. All these possibilities exist. What is also important and very important, we are known as a low-wage country. And that is why people get away with coming to Guyana and making a lot of money. Because we impoverish the people so they're willing to accept the lowest wage possible. But once people have an alternative coming to them in the form of basic income, it means that their reserve price for their labor increases and gives strength to the trade unions, gives them a competitive edge in terms of their bargaining with the employers. All these things exist, and read the report that you see is there.
But Professor, is there still a chance that the government can either repeal or change that very law that you're talking about, and therefore put the person at risk in terms of their commitment to the bank?
Yeah, but our government can also come and repeal the Bank of Guyana. What's so sacred about it? It's not written in the Constitution. And what will happen then?
We know that the government should repeal the Bank of Guyana, but they can repeal a law dealing with cash transfers.
Yeah,
they can repeal anything.
Can revoke any act.
They can repeal anything.
There's no binding for contracted government operations unless you're back to slavery. It's only a slave that does not have an opportunity to void any contract in the future. So that always exists. But we know and we take the social risk that will not happen. And we know that the facts seem to show that on the balance that we are correct. And that's what I will argue. There's no certainty in life except you're a God or a wannabe God.
I want to add, that while it is theoretically possible, it's also possible that the masses of people will fight to defend their interests. We are that will act as a constraining factor for any government. It's like you think any government could take away old age pension?
Or any employer could take away a wage. Some of them try to do by stealing out the country, closing along the farms, and disappearing forever.
While we're waiting on other questions, I just would like to add that one of the hallmarks of the Buxton proposal and the WPA's intervention on this matter is that it is tied to the reduction and ultimate alleviation of poverty. So there is an outcome to what we are proposing. And this is sadly lacking in the government proposal. There's no stated outcome beyond what they willy-nilly call putting money in people's pockets. And we think that this is a very important flaw in the government's proposal, and some well-meaning commentators and others are falling for that trap. When we study the universal basic income and cash transfers in countries around the world, we see a direct correlation between the basic income and the alleviation of poverty. We also see a direct relationship between the cash transfer and school attendance, for example, where parents who benefit from the basic income are encouraged to send their children to school. And we've seen in a number of instances where school attendance has improved considerably wherever this initiative has been implemented. And we think that's a very, very important factor when one takes into consideration that the poverty rate in Guyana is slated at around 42–43%. It's really a scandal in a country that has the growth. And I want to emphasize here that the WPA does recognize and acknowledge the tremendous growth as real. We don't feel that this is a fiction of somebody's imagination. We are experiencing tremendous growth. And we feel that that growth has to be accompanied by development. And for us, development has to begin with the individual, the people of the country who we feel are primary in this regard. And so tying the basic income to poverty, we think is very important and stresses the seriousness of the idea. As Professor Thomas says, if you give it as they are doing to each individual, you're in effect giving it to each voter. And in a sense, that is a very cynical use of a very serious idea that has been adopted, as I said, by countries around the world and by the United Nations. There are studies that have been carried out by these international institutions. We know of a recent study in the Eastern Caribbean to see whether this universal basic income can be effective in those countries. We recently heard the Prime Minister of Barbados adopting the universal basic income. So we feel that the government intervention here is a gimmick, and we have to fight not just for the cash transfer, but to maintain its integrity. So we want to stress the linking of the cash transfer to the alleviation of poverty, because the alleviation of poverty, we think, is central to the translation of our windfall from mere growth to actual development. Perhaps Professor Clive Thomas can expound on that a little bit more. Professor.
Well, I think you said it very clearly and to the point. I will just encourage readers to look, those who have a copy of the recent version of it. It's about 30 pages long, unfortunate, but some things you cannot write very and more concisely than that. And they get the evidence that they are perhaps seeking here. The studies are cited. The information is there, the data is there. One you had raised with me before, people are concerned whether we have enough reserves for this to continue. And that problem is also tackled inside the study. I had originally argued that the amount of reserves and resources that we had ranged in the ballpark figure of 13 to 15 billion barrels, billion barrels of oil. I have since expanded that. I argue at some length, and I know for those who will give anybody, that is probably in the range of 28 to 30 billion now. But I think many people don't even know that we have a new PSA, one that is being run and called a model PSA, being run by public auction. People might not know, but it's a fact that the government, in the information given out to bidders, had announced that the amount of oil reserves we have is 24 billion. And I say this because ExxonMobil is stubbornly remaining at the figure of 11 plus billion. This has been, I've been pointing out, but since the public auction was raised 2 years ago, And many people are still asking me, how come I get such a high figure? I said, what do you mean? I said, they say that Exxon has 11 billion. How could I go past that? I said, well, first of all, I prefer to take the government's figures, and the government says 24. And the government can't lie in an advertisement for public auction because then there's international fraud. So the government must have a serious belief that it's around 24 billion. I've argued my basis for coming at the figure of 28 to 30 billion. And I think the arguments are credible based on complex statistical theory founded on the formulation and the surveys done by the United States Geological Services in 2000 and 2012. I mentioned that because you had asked me to
Yes, Dennis had raised it. Well, I raised it last week, and Dennis had queried how did we come to the number of 30 billion.
it's written in the document.
Right. And so I had alerted you to the fact that the media would be interested in that number. I just wish to recall that when the initial estimates about how much reserves we had were made, Professor Thomas had estimated way above what the government and other experts were saying. In fact, people, you know, were, as Professor Thomas would say, were laughing. And today, you know, his prediction has come through because we are now saying we have 11 billion barrels of oil at a minimum, and the government is saying 24 billion. There was a far cry from when we started, and Thomas had said that we had
In
much.
fact, when the first books were published, people were in print saying that the amount of oil reserve that we had ranged from 600 million barrels to 1.3 billion.
Yeah.
Actually, I have that in print from one of the most famous authors on oil and gas in Ghana. There's eternal embarrassment because you can't live with them. And laughing at my figure, like being an example. Back then, based on the figures that was produced by the US survey, the United States Geological Survey, which I happened to accidentally find, I was sure that based on the statistical odds that they were placing on the findings, that a bet of 13 to 15 billion was a conservative bet and a safe bet. That's why I published it. But now I'm willing to strengthen the bet. I'm going to go higher because I think the odds of finding oil, what we call our creaming curve, the amount of oil we find per drilling, is remarkable. And that's never been repeated in history. It never came before. And therefore, based on that, I think the odds certainly coming out of the kite, the stable block, have led me to believe that we probably get as high as 28 to 30. Yeah, that is, in fact, I didn't want to report it, but I was in fact reviewing it this year when I fell ill. Because you notice my columns have not been in the Static News column. I've been in Static News for about 4 months. But I know I can't resume where I left off. Because nobody will want to go up there. They probably didn't remember writing about them. So I'll be starting a new series beginning next week, next Sunday. And I will get around to that in the new year. Updating the Pakistan proposal just after the budget. Well, what I'm trying to do is to update it based on inflation and based on exchange rate movements between the Guyanese dollar and the US dollar. Because I have given both currencies but I seem to anchor it. I'm implying that I anchor it in the US dollar by giving the 5,000 first. And in fact, it's not 1 million, it's 1.05 million. And for those who read the actual document they have, will see.
Dr. Hines, I'd like to point out that in 1964, I was 13 years of age and I applied to Guyana Oriental College for entry. I passed the exam and I think they wanted a sum of $6 a month or something to that effect, which my parents could not afford. So I'm saying what we're talking about, giving people a guaranteed amount, can change their children's life and their lives fundamentally. If my parents had that $6, I might have gotten through the doors of high school at that time. So all I'm saying is these are life-changing proposals that has immense implications for people's lives.
I agree, you know, with 100%. In fact, looking at my own personal life too, and I don't want to bring that in. I know it made a difference because we didn't have a pot. Any day we went without food, we had to win scholarships to get anywhere.
I think we should take a wrap. I don't think there are any questions forthcoming. No, I don't know if Professor Thomas has any final comments. Or any other member,
But he's here, so
any other member of the chat table.
Thank you.